He saved her from the fire, carrying her on a wagon. But the truth about her family left him stunned. It was a hot day in the west. The air shimmered over the plain, and the smell of smoke drifted on the wind. The horses snorted and pawed the ground, as if they too sensed the coming danger. Elijah Caldwell, a 40-year-old rancher with calloused hands and a sunburned face, heard the shouts from a distance. He was riding along the old road toward Red River when he saw plumes of black smoke rising over the hill. As he got closer, he saw it. A barn was on fire at the very edge of town. The roof was already collapsing, and flames devoured the beams. A crowd of people stood at a distance. Some were crying, some were shouting, but no one dared to enter. Elijah reined in his horse sharply. "Where are the people?" he roared at the crowd. "No one's in there, no one," an old woman mumbled, clutching a child to her chest. But then, a faint female moan could be heard. Elijah distinguished it through the crackling of the fire. The crowd shifted nervously, pretending not to hear. He jumped out of the saddle and ran toward the door. The heat burned his face. The smoke stunned his eyes. He pushed aside a charred beam and burst inside. There, in a corner, amidst the flaming hay, he saw a girl. She lay on the floor, pinned down by half of a collapsed beam. Her dress was torn, her skin covered in soot, and her hair was matted with smoke. "Hold on," he shouted, bending down. She opened her eyes and whispered with her lips alone, "Help." Elijah grabbed the heavy beam, strained with his whole body, and managed to move it. Taking the girl up in his arms, he ran back out. The crowd parted, astonished. No one had dared to even step where he had gone. He laid her on a cart that stood by the road and splashed water on her face from his canteen. She coughed, but her breathing became more regular. "Who is she?" he asked the people standing nearby. They exchanged glances. A man in a dusty hat grimaced and said, "You should have left her in there." "What?" Elijah scowled. "You don't know whose daughter this is, Caldwell," a woman intervened, covering her face with her hand. "Better stay away from her." But he just clenched his fists. He saw a wounded girl before him, almost a child, and thinking about her family name seemed disgusting to him. "She needs a doctor." He snapped and whipped the reins. That evening, when he brought the girl back to his ranch, the fire had long since died down, and the town was buzzing with rumors. The servants helped lay her on a bed. He himself cleaned her burns and cuts, and only then could he get a good look at her. She was young, 17 or 18, a thin face, but with remarkably regular, almost proud features. Her eyes were gray, full of both pain and some hidden strength. She woke up in the morning. At first, she was silent, staring at the ceiling. Then she whispered, "Why did you save me?" "Because otherwise, you would have died," Elijah answered calmly. She turned away. It seemed that words of gratitude were hard for her to utter. A day later, a rider came to his ranch, tall, in a long dark cloak, with a cold face. He introduced himself briefly. "I've come for the girl." "Who are you to her?" Elijah scowled. "That doesn't matter. Her father will decide what to do with her himself." Elijah stepped closer. "She hasn't recovered yet, and I won't give her to someone who won't even give their name." The man clenched his jaw, spat, and said, "Only one thing. You're making a mistake, Caldwell." He jumped on his horse and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. In the evening, Elijah returned to the girl. She was sitting by the window, looking out at the plain. "Who came?" she asked quietly. "A man who said your father would decide your fate," he replied. "But I don't give a damn about his words." She covered her face with her hands. "I can't go back." "Why?" The silence stretched on. Finally, she whispered, "Because my father is the mayor of this town, and he wanted me to burn in that barn." Elijah felt something drop in his chest. He understood why the crowd had been silent, why no one had moved toward the fire. The town was afraid of the man in power, and he had carried his daughter out of the flames. The following days brought tension. In town, people were already gossiping. Caldwell was hiding the mayor's girl, and a living witness at that. One night, as the moon bathed the plain in cold light, the girl spoke. "My name is Catherine. I wasn't supposed to survive." "Tell me," Elijah said, and she told him about how her mother died under strange circumstances, about how her father had been trying to marry her off to a man twice her age for a year to strengthen his power, about how that day he had locked her in the barn and set it on fire from the outside, framing it as an accident. Elijah listened in silence, and he understood that now, in his hands, was the fate of a girl whom the entire town was ready to consign to a silent death. 3 days later, the mayor's men came to the ranch again. This time there were 4 of them, with Winchester rifles. "Caldwell," one of them shouted, "hand over the girl, and the matter will be closed." Elijah came out onto the porch, holding his rifle. "As long as I'm alive, she's under my protection." Silence fell, broken only by the chirping of crickets. The men exchanged glances. One of them grinned and spat in the dust. "You asked for it, rancher." But before the first shot could be fired, Catherine herself came out of the house, in a white dress, with scorched hands, but proud and straight. "Tell my father," she said loudly, "that if he wants me dead, he should come and look me in the eyes." The men scowled. A hint of doubt flickered in their eyes. They were used to scaring and breaking people, not to a victim coming to meet them. Elijah placed a hand on her shoulder and said quietly, "Back inside now, Catherine. Your father will come. And then, the truth will come out." So ended the first week after the fire. And ahead of them were long nights in which Elijah understood he had accidentally let a girl into his home whose blood was capable of turning the entire town upside down. And now their fates were linked forever. The night on the ranch was restless. Elijah sat on the porch with his rifle, his eyes sleepless. Catherine stayed by the window, as if expecting her father's men to emerge from the darkness again. The morning brought rumors. A neighboring shepherd brought the news. The town's mayor, Catherine's father, had announced that his daughter had died in the fire, and that Elijah was hiding a stranger girl in his house. "A stranger!" Elijah roared. "He locked her in that barn himself." "People are afraid to talk," the shepherd shrugged. "The mayor has them under his thumb. Who would dare to contradict him?" The day was hot. Elijah worked with the horses, but his thoughts didn't leave him. He understood. His ranch had now become a fortress, and the enemies would not retreat. Catherine came out into the yard to him. She looked weak, but determination had appeared in her eyes. "I have to tell," she said. "Tell what exactly?" She took a deep breath. "Not just about the fire. Everything I know. About his deals, about the bribe judges, about the land he took from families. My father didn't just want my death. He wanted to get rid of the only witness." Elijah froze. Her words were more dangerous than a bullet. The mayor's power rested on fear and silence. "But if the truth got out, if you speak," he said quietly, "we'll both be hunted." She looked him directly in the eyes. "The hunt has already begun." In the evening, a town meeting was held in the square. Elijah learned about it from a young helper who galloped up on his horse. "Everyone's there," he shouted. "The mayor says you should be put on trial." Elijah understood. The time had come. He could hide, move to another valley, abandon everything. But then Catherine would die, and with her, the conscience of an entire town. He saddled his horse. "I'm going to Raid River." Catherine stepped forward. "And I'm coming with you." The crowd in the square buzzed like a hive. The mayor stood on a platform, his face radiating self-satisfaction. "Citizens," he shouted, "yesterday we lost my daughter Catherine in a terrible fire. But today I must say, a certain rancher is hiding a fugitive, claiming she is my own flesh and blood. This is slander. This is an attempt to undermine order in our town." The crowd whispered. People wanted to believe, but doubt gnawed at them from within. And then the sound of hooves was heard. Elijah rode right into the square, holding the reins tightly, and behind him sat Catherine alive, in a white dress. The whispers turned into shouts. Someone made the sign of the cross. Someone recoiled. Catherine rose in the saddle and said loudly, "I am alive, and my father is lying." The crowd gasped. The mayor's face twisted into a grimace. He held out his hand, seized them, but no one moved. People stood frozen, torn between fear and shock. Elijah dismounted, helped Catherine down. Together they stepped toward the platform. "You wanted her to burn," Elijah said loudly. "I carried her out of the barn myself." Everyone saw that no one tried to help, because everyone knew it was a sentence. The crowd murmured. A few men nodded in agreement. Women began to whisper, remembering their own troubles caused by the mayor's power. Catherine took a step forward. "My father stole land from Widow Carter, intimidated the McGregor family, and bribed the sheriff. I saw the papers. I heard his conversations. He wanted to marry me off to a gun trader to gain control of supplies. When I refused, he decided it was easier to get rid of me." The mayor turned pale. He understood. His daughter had thwarted all his plans. "She's lying," he roared, pulling out a revolver. "She's not my daughter. This is a setup." The shot rang out deafeningly, but the bullet didn't hit Catherine. Elijah managed to shield her with his shoulder. The crowd screamed. People scattered, while some on the contrary rushed toward the mayor. They tried to grab him, but he pushed the nearest person away and, under the cover of his guards, disappeared into the alleys. Catherine fell to her knees beside Elijah. No, no. Her hands trembled as she tried to stop the bleeding. I'm alive, he rasped. Don't cry, girl, it's just a scratch. But they both understood. There was no turning back now. The mayor would try to wipe them off the face of the earth. That night, they returned to the ranch again. Elijah lay on the bed, bandaged, but his gaze remained firm. Catherine sat beside him, not moving a step away. Do you understand? He said. You can't stay in town now. He won't rest. She shook her head. I won't run away. I've been silent for too long. Let him kill me, but the truth is already out. People saw. Elijah smiled slightly. You're braver than many men, Catherine, but courage alone isn't enough. We'll have to prepare for war. The next few days were difficult. The ranch was turned into a fortified camp. Elijah taught the boys how to shoot and set up barricades on the trails. Catherine helped as much as she could, and every evening she wrote down her memories of her father's crimes on paper, so that no one could say later, she made it all up. But tension hung in the air. Neighbors sent word more and more often. The mayor's men were gathering a squad. They spoke of dozens of armed men ready to besiege the ranch. And one night, as the sky was illuminated by flashes of distant storms, Catherine approached Elijah. If they come, she said, I'll go out to them myself. Let them take me. Elijah turned to her sharply. Never. You won't go to those jackals, but people will die because of me, because of your father, not because of you, he said firmly. You are a victim, Catherine, not the culprit. Remember that. She fell silent, but tears glistened in her eyes. 3 days later, it all began. Dust appeared on the horizon. The mayor's squad was approaching. Winchester rifles gleamed in the rays of the setting sun. Elijah gathered his men by the barn. Tonight will decide everything. Either we hold our ground, or they'll wipe us off the face of the earth. Catherine stood beside him, pale, but upright. Her voice was loud. They want to make you silent, just as they made me silent. But if we hold our ground today, tomorrow the whole town will understand that it's possible to live without fear. The people shouted in response, raising their weapons. At that moment, Elijah understood. She had become a symbol. The girl they tried to burn was now burning inside herself, and that fire was stronger than any flame. The night fell on the ranch, and with it the first shootout. Shots tore through the silence. Bullets hit the walls, boards cracked. Elijah's men returned fire. Catherine was hiding in the house, but her heart was aching to go outside. She knew this was just the beginning, and if they survived, an even more terrible battle awaited them. And yet, even amid the roar of the shots, she kept repeating to herself one thing: I am no longer afraid. The siege began in earnest. The ranch turned into a fiery dot on the map. Gunshots, shouts, the smell of gunpowder and blood. At night, the air trembled from the thunder, and during the day from the heat and dust kicked up by hooves. Elijah lay in cover by the barn, his rifle against his shoulder. His eyes had not known sleep for 2 days. Yesterday he had to bandage his arm again. The wound from the mayor's bullet ached, but there was no time to rest. Catherine didn't fall behind. She brought water, bandaged the wounded, and at times even took a rifle herself when the attackers got too close. At first, the men grumbled, but the girl is only in the way. But after a couple of accurate shots from her, they fell silent. She knew how to handle a weapon as well as they did. At dawn, the enemy squad retreated. The ground was littered with bodies. Elijah's men were tired but not broken. They'll be back, he said hoarsely, looking into the distance, this time with even greater force. And he was right. 2 days later, a new group approached the ranch, about 40 men. In front rode a man whom even bandits feared. A scar on his face, a grim look, and 2 revolvers on his shoulders. He was known as Hank Grayson, a mercenary the mayor had hired for gold. Well, rancher, he shouted, riding closer, do you really think you can stand against us? Elijah came out to the gates. His voice was firm, though he was boiling inside. I think everyone has a choice. Leave before it's too late. Grayson smirked. I'm not used to leaving. I'm used to taking. The night turned out to be brutal. Grayson and his men surrounded the ranch and began setting fire to the sheds. Flames leapt to the sky, illuminating frightened faces. Elijah sent his men to put out the fire, but he knew it was a trick. Under the cover of the smoke, the bandits would break through. And that's what happened. 2 men were caught right by the well. They were led to the middle of the yard, their hands tied. Grayson stood opposite them, holding a torch. "Surrender, rancher, otherwise, they'll burn alive." Elijah clenched his teeth. He saw Catherine's lips trembling. "No mercy," she whispered. "If we surrender, he'll kill everyone." Then Elijah raised his rifle and fired. The bullet knocked the torch out of Grayson's hands. At the same moment, the men from the barn opened fire. A new massacre began. In the thick of the fight, Catherine saw her father for the first time beside Grayson. He had come himself. His gaze was icy, devoid of paternal blood. "I have disowned you," he shouted through the roar. "To me, you are dead." Catherine raised her rifle and replied, "And I was born anew." Her shot took down one of his guards, but the mayor hid behind the carts. By morning, the ranch was holding on with its last ounce of strength. The watchtower and sheds had burned down, and several people were wounded. But Grayson had also lost many men. He retreated, leaving the corpses on the ground. Before leaving, he shouted, "I'll be back tomorrow, and then I won't leave anyone alive." The silence after the fight was more terrible than the gunshots. People sat by the fires, bandaging each other, silently staring at the ground. Catherine sat down next to Elijah. He held his rifle on his knees, his eyes red with fatigue. "Maybe it's time to leave," she whispered. "We'll find another town, start over. If we leave," he said slowly, "he'll be stronger. He'll swallow this town, just like many others. No one will stand against him. We are the last frontier." She lowered her head, but a new fire was kindling in her heart. She understood. Elijah was right. This was no longer just her story. It was the story of all those who were held in fear by her father. The next day, people no one expected to see came to the ranch. Old men, women, teenagers from the town. They brought food, bandages, and even some weapons. "We are tired of being afraid," one of them said. "We're with you." Elijah smiled for the first time in a long time. "Then we have a chance." In the evening, Catherine went to the fence. The sun was setting, painting the steppe in bloody tones. She looked at the horizon and knew. Tomorrow, they would come again. But this time, they would have an army. Elijah walked up to her, putting a hand on her shoulder. "No matter how it ends, know this. I am proud of you." She turned to him. "I lived in fear my whole life, and now, for the first time, I feel freedom. Even if I die tomorrow, I have no regrets." Elijah looked into her eyes and understood. Before him was not just a girl, but a symbol, a flame that could no longer be extinguished. And when night fell, they both knew. The decisive battle was ahead. The morning over the steppe dawned red and heavy. The sun rose slowly, as if it knew there was blood and smoke ahead. Elijah's men prepared for the fight. They reinforced the fence, dragged barrels of water, and oiled their rifles. Even the teenagers stood with stones and makeshift spears. Catherine walked among them, handing out bandages and hardtack. She saw that fear was gnawing at them from within, but there was also determination. Elijah inspected every corner. He had not slept for almost 2 days, but he held on. Now he was not just a farmer. His voice was firm, like a man who knew that the lives of others depended on him. "Today, we will decide everything," he said. "Either we break them, or they burn us to the ground. But if we fall, we will fall with honor." The silence in response was louder than words. By noon, a rumble of hooves could be heard from a distance. A veil of dust rose above the horizon. It was Grayson and his men. This time there were more than 50 of them. In front rode the mayor in a black cloak, with the scarred Grayson beside him. Their column stretched in a long line, and the heart of everyone on the ranch tightened. "My God," someone whispered. But Elijah raised his hand. "We stand until the end." The first attack came suddenly. Grayson's men rushed toward the gates, shooting at everything alive. Bullets pinged off the boards, the air filled with screams. But the defenders held their ground. From the barn roof, an old veteran with a Winchester took down 3 men in a matter of seconds. Catherine shot another, her shoulder jerking from the recoil. Her heart was pounding, but her eyes were cold. Grayson tried to break through the defenses, but each time he was forced back, leaving dead behind him. Then he changed tactics. Several bandits crept up from the rear and set the fence on fire. The wood ignited, and flames leapt upward. People in a panic began to put out the fire, but the smoke suffocated them, and the enemies attacked again. Elijah grabbed a bucket but saw Grayson personally breaking into the yard on horseback. His revolvers fired non-stop. 2 defenders fell immediately. Elijah rushed to intercept him. Their gazes met 2 warriors, 2 worlds. Grayson smirked. "Well, farmer, ready to die." "I am," Elijah replied, "but not my own." They clashed. Gunshots thundered around them, but for them, the world narrowed. Elijah shot first. The bullet grazed the scar on Grayson's face. He just growled and lunged at him with a knife. They grappled, falling into the dust. The knife gleamed in Grayson's hands, but Elijah managed to grab his wrist. Their strength was almost equal, and the ground trembled from their struggle. Catherine screamed, aiming her rifle, but she was afraid of hitting Elijah. Grayson struck with his knee, and Elijah staggered. The knife slid toward his throat, but at that moment, Catherine fired. The bullet lodged in Grayson's shoulder. He howled, and Elijah was able to flip him over, pinning him to the ground. "This is for everyone," he whispered, and struck him with the butt of his rifle. Grayson fell unconscious, but the fight was not over yet. The mayor raised his hand, and his men attacked again. And then something happened that no one expected. The townspeople who had come to help emerged from behind the hills. Men, women, teenagers, some with rifles, some with pitchforks. There were many of them. They charged into the bandits' rear, and they couldn't withstand it. The screams mingled. The ground trembled from hooves. The siege turned into chaos. The mayor's men began to flee. The mayor himself tried to escape, but Catherine blocked his path. "Father," her voice trembled, "for so many years I've been afraid of you. But now it's different." He raised his revolver. "Traitor." And at that moment, a shot rang out. It wasn't her shot. It was Elijah. The bullet pierced the mayor's chest, and he fell from his horse. His eyes still searched for his daughter, but there was no remorse or love in them, only hatred, until the very end. When the fighting subsided, the field around the ranch was strewn with bodies. Smoke rose to the sky, and the wind carried the smell of blood. People gathered at the gates. They were wounded, exhausted, but alive. Elijah stood in the center, leaning on his rifle. Catherine was beside him, her face covered in ash and tears. Someone shouted, "We won!" And a rumble of joy and weeping rolled over the ranch. That night, a quiet fire burned. Elijah sat next to Catherine. She stared into the flames and whispered, "I am free. Free for the first time in my life." Elijah nodded. "You're not alone. And now the whole town is free too." They watched the embers smolder, knowing that a difficult road lay ahead. But for the first time in a long time, it was a road without fear. The morning after the battle was the quietest Elijah had ever known. No clang of gunshots, no neighing of horses, no screams of pain. Only the wind wandered through the ashes and the dry grass rustled under their boots. The entire ranch yard was covered with the traces of yesterday's hell. Broken carts, smoking beams, bloodstains on the ground. People walked slowly, like shadows, gathering the bodies. No one spoke loudly. Even the children were silent, as if they knew words were not needed. Elijah stood by the gates, watching the men lay the dead in a row. Among them were his neighbors and those who had come to help from the town. Each of them had fallen so that others could live on. Catherine came up to him. Her dress was torn and sooty, her hair tangled, but her eyes were clear. She held a handkerchief in her hands, and drops of blood trickled onto it as she wiped her face. "We have to bury them with dignity," she said quietly. "They deserve more than just a grave in the steppe." Elijah nodded. "We'll dig the ground until sunset today. Everyone will get across." All day, people dug graves. The women prepared small boards, nailing names to them, but many names were unknown, so they simply wrote, "Son of the West, fighter for freedom, unknown." By evening, an entire cemetery had grown behind the ranch. The crosses stretched in a line toward the horizon. Elijah stood in the middle and felt this was not an end, but a beginning. That night, fires burned again, but now their light was soft. People sat together, sharing bread and kind words. Tears and laughter intertwined. The survivors felt like a family, bound by blood. Catherine came up to Elijah and sat down next to him. She stared into the flame and suddenly said, "You know, my whole life I thought I had to be afraid. Afraid of my father, his power, his men. But now he is dead, and everything he built has collapsed. I feel an emptiness, but also a lightness." Elijah looked at her. "You are free. That's the most precious thing you have now. But freedom is heavy. It requires courage." She smiled faintly. "And will you be there to remind me?" Elijah didn't say anything. He just placed his hand over hers. A few days later, changes came to the town. The people who had witnessed the mayor's fall understood power was now in their hands. Grayson was chained and thrown into the cellar of the old courthouse. No one knew whether to put him on trial or lynch him immediately. Elijah insisted on a trial. "We've shed too much blood," he told the assembly. "If we start killing without a trial, we'll become just like them. Let him answer to the law." Many were against it. They craved revenge. But Elijah's word now carried weight. He was the one who led the people into battle and brought them out alive. They trusted him. Catherine devoted herself to those who were left without a home. She cared for the widows and helped the children. At first, people whispered the mayor's daughter, the one who was his flesh and blood. But soon they understood. She was different. Not him. She saved. She didn't break. One evening, a woman in mourning approached her. "My husband died here," she said, pointing to the crosses, "and I hated your father for it. But I see you're not him. Thank you for standing with us." Catherine barely held back her tears. "I've spent my whole life trying to escape his shadow. Maybe now I can." Elijah, meanwhile, was rebuilding the ranch. The men helped him, fixing fences and putting the barn in order. Every day was a struggle, not with an enemy, but with fatigue, with memory, with pain. But the land didn't wait, it demanded hands. Sometimes at night, he would get up, go out into the yard, and look toward the graves. He remembered every shot, every scream, and he felt guilt for those he couldn't protect. He once confessed to Catherine, "I'm not a hero. I did what I could. But sometimes I think, maybe if I had done more, those people would be alive." She took his hand. "Elijah, you saved hundreds. Even me. Don't devalue that." A month later, the town gathered in the square. The trial of Grayson. He was brought in chained, beaten, but his eyes still burned with malice. The crowd roared, demanding blood. But the judge raised his hand. Elijah took the stand as a witness, telling of his crimes, the arsons, murders, and tortures. Grayson remained silent, only smirking. "Your words mean nothing," he finally said. "In the West, power decides, not the law." Elijah looked him directly in the eyes. "Then know this. Your power died with your master." The court sentenced him to be hanged. When the noose tightened, people didn't rejoice. It was not a triumph, but a heavy full stop. From then on, life began to change. A new town grew in place of the old ranch. People called it Valley of the Free. Those who fled violence and injustice flocked here. Elijah became something like an elder. People came to him for advice, for resolving disputes. He didn't want power, but people trusted him more than anyone else. Catherine opened a school for children, teaching them to read and write. She knew the price of a dungeon and wanted the new generation to know the price of freedom. Sometimes in the evenings, they sat on the porch together. The silence of the steps settled on their shoulders, and both understood the war within was not yet over. But there was a support between them that was enough. One day Catherine said, "Do you believe we deserve this peace?" Elijah looked into the distance, where the sunset painted the mountains in crimson. "We paid for it with blood, and now we have to make sure it wasn't in vain." She rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time in a long time, there was no fear in her heart. So began a new life in the Valley of the Free. But every dawn reminded them, freedom is not a gift. It is an eternal watch, and everyone who survived now carried it on their shoulders. 6 months had passed since Grayson's death. The land that people had recently called the ghost town was now breathing with new life. New houses, workshops, and shops had grown in place of the ashes. People brought boards, stone, and livestock, everything they could. Every morning, the streets of the Valley of the Free came alive. The blacksmith hammered hot iron, women poured milk into pitchers, and children ran to the school where Catherine was waiting for them. It seemed that the town had found its own rhythm. But underneath this new life, a different fire was hidden. Where people gather, disputes always arise, and not everyone wanted peace. One evening, Elijah was sitting by the fire with a few elders. The men were arguing, who had the right to divide the land, who should get the best pastures. "I was here first," a gray-bearded John Harris stubbornly said. "My herds grazed here even before any of you heard of the valley. I deserve the best plots. And what makes us any worse?" A young farmer retorted, raising his fist. "We shed blood together with you." Elijah stood up, placed his hand on the table, and the argument subsided. "No one here is the owner," he said firmly. "The land doesn't belong to one person. It feeds everyone who respects it. We will divide the pastures fairly." But a shadow flickered in Harris's eyes. He nodded, but his lips were tight. Catherine, meanwhile, faced a different kind of resistance. Not all parents wanted their children to learn. "A girl doesn't need to read and write," a man said sharply one day, pulling his daughter by the hand. "She should be spinning or milking cows." Catherine couldn't help but respond. If she knows her letters, the first traitor she meets won't be able to cheat her. Literacy is power. The man looked at her with contempt. "You sound like your father. Too much power for a woman." The words hurt, but Catherine didn't flinch. "I speak as a person who has seen slavery, and I don't want children to be in chains again." A woman standing nearby quietly intervened. "Let the girl learn. I'll bring her myself tomorrow." This is how Catherine won hearts, not with force, but with patience. But rumors grew. "Elijah wants to be the new mayor. Catherine is building a school to control our children. They are trying to seize power." These whispers were born at firesides and in dusty taverns. Those who were envious added fuel to the fire. One night, Elijah was awakened by a knock on the door. A boy stood on the doorstep, trembling with fear. "The crosses at the cemetery," he gasped. "Someone broke them." Elijah threw a cloak over his shoulders and rushed there. A gloom reigned over the graves. Dozens of crosses had been torn out, planks broken, the ground trampled. On one of the crosses, in red paint, was scrawled, "No power over us." Elijah's heart tightened. It was a challenge. The next day he gathered the townspeople. "We buried our brothers here," he said, pointing to the ruined graveyard. "Those who did this wanted to sow discord. They wanted us to forget what they died for, but we won't forget." The crowd buzzed. Someone was shouting for revenge. Someone else was demanding punishments. Catherine climbed onto a wagon next to Elijah. "I know many of you are afraid we want to become rulers, but the truth is different. We only want you to be able to live without chains and the whip. We are all equal." Her words were sincere, but Harris and his supporters exchanged glances. Animosity burned in their eyes. Later that evening, Harris came to Elijah. "You're a good fighter," he said hoarsely, "but you know what they do with leaders in the West. They overthrow them. People are tired of power. Even of yours." Elijah looked at him steadfastly. "I have no power. There is only responsibility." Harris smirked. "That's what you think. That the people already call you their chief." The internal cracks were growing wider. Some were drawn to Elijah and Catherine, seeing them as a pillar of support. Others grumbled, accusing them of a hidden desire for power. Catherine shared her fear with Elijah. "We fought Grayson so people could live freely, and now they themselves want to find a new tyrant, even if they think it's you." Elijah was silent. He understood. Freedom was frightening. People look for a hand to lead them. An alarming turning point came when new settlers arrived in town, former mercenaries, greedy for easy power. They quickly saw the division and began to incite it. "Why listen to one man?" they shouted in the square. "Divide the land however you want. Take what you can hold." That same night, the barn where grain was stored was set on fire. The fire destroyed the winter supplies. The town was on the verge of starvation. At the emergency meeting, people were yelling at each other. "It's Harris." He himself said Elijah was taking too much upon himself. "Lies." His people set it on fire. "They're all in it together." Elijah stood, overriding the noise. "If we start fighting among ourselves, we'll die. We can get grain if we go together to the neighboring town and buy it. But if we continue to tear the valley to pieces, no one will save us." The crowd fell silent. Catherine stood beside him. "We are either a family or a pack of wolves. You decide." In that moment, Elijah understood. The enemies were no longer on the outside. The enemy was within, in envy, greed, in the memory of old power. He swore to himself that he would save the town at any cost. But deep down, he knew a bigger storm was coming. After the barn fire, the tension in Free Valley only grew. People were afraid of the future. Some held on to Elijah and Catherine, while others gathered more and more often to the side, whispered around campfires, and looked on with suspicion. Rumors multiply. "Elijah himself set the grain on fire to control us. Catherine wants the school not for the children, but for power over our families. They are no better than Grayson." Catherine saw how students began to disappear from the school. Parents refused to send their children, afraid they would be turned into Elijah's soldiers. She cried at night, but during the day, she kept a calm face. Elijah, meanwhile, noticed Harris' glances more and more often. The old man was gathering the discontented around him, and their numbers grew every day. One evening, Harris held a meeting by the saloon. Dozens of people gathered. and mercenaries stood with weapons, covering his speech. "We came here for freedom," Harris said, his voice trembling with anger. "And what do we have? One chief instead of another." "Yes, Elijah saved us, but now he acts as if the town is his. He divides the land, makes decisions for everyone, teaches our children his ways." The crowd buzzed. Someone shouted, "True." Someone else was silent. Harris continued, "I will not let one man become the master. Let each person decide for themselves what to do with their land. Let each answer only for themselves. That is what freedom is." The crowd roared, and many raised their hands. That night, one of Elijah's loyal men crept into his house. "They are going to overthrow you," he whispered. "Harris is getting weapons ready. He promised the people they'll divide everything they find among themselves, without rules." Elijah sat heavily on a chair. He knew this was no longer just words. This was the path to civil war. "If we start shooting at each other," he began, but couldn't finish. Catherine came up, placing a hand on his shoulder. "If we don't stop them, the whole town will be swallowed by chaos." The next day, Elijah gathered the people in the square. "You know who I am. I didn't ask for power. I only wanted no one to be a slave anymore. Like under Grayson, I don't keep any gold or weapons for myself. Everything we do is for the town." Harris stepped forward, his eyes burning. "Eli," he shouted, "you want power. But I'll tell the people the truth. A real leader isn't someone who gives orders, but someone who lets us decide for ourselves." The crowd split. Half shouted Elijah's name, half shouted Harris. Then Harris took a step, raised his rifle, and fired into the air. "Listen to me," he shouted. "Today, we will decide who is the master of the valley. Either he leaves, or we leave ourselves." The mercenaries raised their weapons. The people standing with Harris moved forward. Elijah stood opposite them, but didn't draw his revolver. "I won't shoot my brothers," he said loudly. But it wasn't words that decided it. Suddenly, one of the mercenaries fired and the bullet flew a centimeter from the head of a bow standing in the crowd. Women screamed, children scattered. Elijah rushed forward and shouted, "Enough." The crowd mixed. Some raised their weapons, others covered their children. Dust swirled in the air. Catherine stopped everything. She climbed the school steps and shouted so that her voice carried across the whole square. "Stop. You call this freedom? When brother goes against brother, when children fall to the ground under bullets. This isn't freedom, it's a new tyranny." The crowd froze. Even Harris turned around. Catherine raised her hands. "I teach your children not for myself, but for them, so they can read the laws, protect their rights, so no new Grayson can deceive them. And you are now yourselves calling him back, destroying what your comrades died for." People exchanged glances. Many lowered their weapons, but Harris didn't give up. He raised his rifle and aimed it straight at Elijah. "You're lying. You want power." At that moment, a shot rang out in the crowd. Harris staggered and fell. His rifle slipped from his hands. Everyone turned around. It was one of his own supporters who had shot him. "Enough with the blood," he said. "We're tired." The crowd froze. No one took a step. Elijah approached Harris, who lay coughing. The old man looked at him with a cloudy gaze. "You think you won?" he whispered. "But people will always look for an enemy. Today it's me, tomorrow it's you." And Harris died. After that, the town was plunged into silence. People dispersed in silence. The mercenaries abandoned their weapons and left. Elijah and Catherine were left alone in the square. "We held the town," Catherine said, "but I'm afraid this is just the beginning." Elijah looked at the sky, where the sunset was crimson. "We are not rulers. We are only guardians, but we will have to guard for longer than we thought." And he understood. The struggle was only just beginning. After Harris' death, a strange silence fell. It seemed the town exhaled and at the same time became more cautious with every step. People stopped gathering in crowds, avoided talking about the future. Elijah and Catherine did everything to restore order. "We can't allow the town to drown in fear," Elijah said. "If we let things drift now, Harris will have won even in death." At his insistence, the community established new rules. The land is communal. Weapons are stored in an armory. Decisions are made by vote. But the trust was no longer the same. At every meeting, there was a shadow of doubt. What if this council also becomes a new tyranny? In early spring, a rider came to the valley. His face was hidden by a hat, his clothes were dusty, and a revolver, worn from constant use, hung at his side. He went into the saloon, ordered whiskey, and began talking to the owner. I hear you folks live here without a sheriff and without a master. You decide everything yourselves." The saloon owner was silent but tensely wiped a glass. "And I also heard that your land is fertile, the wheat grows well, the cattle graze freely, and rumors are already going around down the river. They say the town is rich but weak." These words echoed through the saloon. People sitting at the tables frowned. No one answered. The rider smirked. "Tell your people that soon those who know how to take will come if they don't want to share." And he left, leaving a heavy silence behind him. The news reached Elijah. He gathered the council. "This is not just a wanderer," he said. "This is a scout. They are checking how ready we are to defend ourselves. And we're not ready." One of the residents said bitterly. "We just barely avoid killing each other." Catherine stood up. "But that is exactly what should be our strength. We stood firm on the inside. Now we must show that we can also stand firm on the outside." Soon, the first signs of a threat appeared. At night, someone carved a brand on the barn gate, a snake coiled around a dagger. This was the sign of the Black Jackals gang, a group that held the western counties in fear. A week later, a herd of cattle disappeared. Hoof prints led into the desert. "This is a warning," Elijah said. "They expect us to get scared and abandon the land, or they will come and take it themselves." Catherine added. Elijah organized patrols. Men and women took turns on duty on the hills. But the jackals were clever. They set fire to fields at night, stole horses, and left blood signs on doors. Fear again began to gnaw at hearts. People whispered, "Maybe it's easier to leave. We can't endure a war." Elijah knew, if fear won, the valley would perish. One evening, he came to the school where Catherine was gathering the children. "I think they see us as weak," he said. "We must prove that we can stand. But I need a plan." Catherine looked at the blackboard, where the words strength and unity were written in chalk. "They are strong with weapons," she replied. "But we are stronger because we know how to stick together. We can give them something they don't expect: organization." And so, the plan was born. "Every man and every woman must know their place in the defense," Elijah said. "We are not an army, but we are a community." Preparation began. In the square, they taught those who had never held a weapon how to shoot. Catherine kept records. Who could fix wagons, who could treat the wounded, who was ready to stand guard at night. The children learned signals. If the enemy appeared, they would raise flags on the hill. The first raid happened at the end of May. At night, riders surrounded the valley. Torches blazed. The yelping of jackals, both living and human, was heard. They tried to break in from 3 sides at once, but the lookouts had spotted them in advance. The flag shot up on the hill, and the whole town rose. Women and men came out with weapons. Elijah shouted, "Today, we are not fugitives. Today, we are the masters of our land." A firefight ensued. The jackals didn't expect the people to be so organized. With every minute, their attack faltered. Catherine, standing with the children, saw sparks of gunfire burst in the sky. She prayed that Elijah would stay alive. By morning, the jackals retreated, leaving several bodies behind. But this was only the beginning. "They'll be back," Elijah said, wiping blood from his face. "And next time they'll bring more." Catherine looked at the town. The houses were blackened with smoke. The people were tired, but for the first time, there was no fear in their eyes. "Let them come," she said. "Now we know we can stand firm." But beyond the horizon, where the dawn painted the desert, new clouds were already gathering. The leader of the Black Jackals swore he would wipe Free Valley from the face of the earth. The summer was scorching. The ground cracked from the heat, and it seemed that nature itself was waiting for the first blood to spill. Rumors about Free Valley spread throughout the region. They said that everyone here worked as equals, that women voted, that the land wasn't divided between rich and poor. For some, it sounded like a dream. For others, like a challenge. And for the Black Jackals gang, it became an insult. Scouts reported the jackals were gathering forces. More than 50 armed men, seasoned in raids, were heading for the valley. With them were cannons, a supply of ammunition, and a thirst for blood. Elijah gathered everyone in the square. "They are coming for our land, for our lives. But we will not be slaves. We will not leave. Today, each of us is a defender of the valley." He raised his fist. Others raised theirs behind him. Even the old men, even the women, even the bows barely able to hold a rifle. Catherine stood beside him. "We must show them that the land does not surrender to predators. If we stand firm now, we will stand firm forever." The night before the battle was strangely quiet. No one slept. People sharpened knives, fixed wagons, checked gunpowder. Catherine wrote the names of all the residents on the blackboard in the school, as if she was afraid that tomorrow it could only be reread as a memory. Elijah sat by the fire. He thought about how he once brought a girl to this valley on a cart, saving her from the fire. Then, he didn't know who she was or what kind of family she came from. Now, she had become the heart of this place, and he its shoulder. At dawn, the jackals appeared, black scarves over their faces, shouts, clanging metal. They advanced like a wave, confident they would sweep everything out of their way. For the land, Elijah shouted, and the first shot rang out. The battle was fierce. The jackals rushed into the town, but every house was fortified, every street turned into a trap. Women shot from windows, children tossed ammunition, old men rang bells to disorient the enemies. Catherine stood by the school, directing the defense of the eastern flank. She held a revolver in her hands, though her fingers trembled. When one of the raiders ran too close, she pulled the trigger. His body fell at her feet, and for the first time, horror flickered in her eyes. She had taken a human life. Elijah, noticing this, broke through the smoke and shouts to her. "Don't look at him," he said. "Look at us. We are fighting for life, not for death." Hour after hour, the fighting didn't subside. The jackals set fire to warehouses, tried to break through with a battering ram, but the community held. When the sun reached its zenith, the gang leader, nicknamed Snake, rode forward on a black stallion. His face was scarred, and his eyes burned with hatred. "You are pathetic farmers," he shouted. "The land belongs to those who know how to take it." Elijah came out to meet him. "And we will prove that the land belongs to those who know how to defend it." They engaged in a skirmish. Snake drew his revolver, but Elijah knocked it away with a blow, and they grappled hand to hand. The crowd around them froze. It seemed that the fate of the entire town was being decided in this fight. Elijah fell. Snake raised his knife, but at the last moment, Catherine fired. The bullet pierced the bandit's shoulder, and Elijah seized his arm. A second later, Snake lay in the dust, disarmed. "Get out," Elijah said, breathing heavily. "Your time here is over." The jackals wavered. Their leader was defeated, and the farmers they considered prey had proven to be unyielding. One by one, they retreated, leaving the battlefield. By evening, silence once again reigned in the valley. But it was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of victory. Catherine sat next to Elijah by the charred bar. He was covered in blood but alive. She pressed close to him. "We stood firm." He nodded. "But not because I fought, but because everyone stood together." The next day, the residents gathered in the square. For the first time, they were not discussing punishments and fears. They were making plans to rebuild homes, to grow a new harvest, to teach children how to hold a weapon if necessary. Catherine said, "Today, we became who we always dreamed of being. We proved that justice and freedom can live even in the Wild West." Elijah looked up at the mountains. "May this land be a home for those who seek the truth, and we will be its guardians." From that day on, Free Valley began to be called the place where people defeated death. Rumors of the victory for the jackals spread throughout the region. Some considered it a miracle, others madness, but many began to come to the valley to start a new life. Elijah and Catherine watched the town grow, and they knew there would be many more trials ahead. But what happened that day would never be erased by the wind or the dust of the desert. And if someone years later asked their children and grandchildren, "Why is this land called Free Valley?" they would answer, "Because here, people once decided that freedom is more valuable than fear."